we are here today to celebrate in part the arrival of spring, which in principle at least means warm light and regrowth of a dormant organic world, a time for fresh new beginnings. At the same time, our species continues to be confronted with exorbitant racially motivated violence, xenophobia, and cultural division. This, then, is an ideal time to consider the thoughtful, poignant, multi-layered practice of Charles Campbell, whose art reflects the profound interconnections between the natural realms of lichen, bacteria, and oxygen, and the human worlds of poetry, history, and spirit. It's my tremendous pleasure to introduce Charles. He is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and curator who lives and works on ʷəŋən territory in Victoria, BC. His artworks have been exhibited widely in Canada and internationally and include sculptures, paintings, sonic installations, and performances. Charles's work has been included in a number of recent group exhibitions, such as The Other Side of Now at the Perez Art Museum in Miami in 2020, Vancouver Special, Disorientations and Echo at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2021, Fragments of Epic Memory at the Art Gallery of Ontario, also in 2021, and The Chorus is Speaking, Experiencing Identities of Blackness in Canada at the Campbell River Art Gallery in 2022. Charles holds an MA in Fine Art from Goldsmith College and a BFA from Concordia University. He was the recipient of a 2020 City of Victoria Creative Builder Award, and just last year he was awarded the prestigious 2022 VIVA Award from the Jack and Doris Shadbolt Foundation. Tonight, Charles is joined in conversation with Elliott Ramsey, who I'll also introduce. Elliot is curator of the Polygon Gallery, based on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. He holds a Master of Arts in Comparative Media Arts from Simon Fraser University. Ramsey is an alumnus of the Association of Art Museum Curators Professional Alliance for Curators of Color and has sat on numerous panels, advisories, and art juries, including the Sobri Award, VIVA Award, Portfolio Prize, and the Capture Photography Festival, among other committees. Elliot curated the current Polygon Gallery exhibition As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, presented by Aperture and featuring works from the Toronto-based Wedge collection, which is currently touring. Please join me in welcoming Elliot and Charles to the stage. Over to you both.
Before we start, I just wanted to offer a libation to all of our ancestors. To make the white overproof rum. That's just a way of acknowledging the ancestors' presence, inviting their spirit in here with us, and wishing for their blessings.
Thanks, Charles, for bringing them in, and in so many ways in this exhibition. I mean, it's thrilling to go into an ocean to Livity and to hear breath and to also see breath and to visualize it. And so I'm curious to maybe start from a place of talking about how this work comes from previous works. You know, when I was asked, when you go into that smaller room and you hear that sort of chorus of black breathing, one of them is me. You know, I just remember I was thinking back, you know, when you invited me and many others in the community to be part of that project, thinking about that you've often brought others into your projects and your research, going back to, you know, your actor boy performances, like we're seeing here on the screen. So if you could maybe take us back through, you know, how you arrived at this, maybe starting with the project at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and then the recent one at here at Surrey Art Gallery with the spectrograph.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Elliot. So I was invited by Fanuel Antwi to be part of Vancouver Special in 2021, and it was the work I was kind of consumed with when he was asking that question was, inviting me to join that exhibition, was this tree, this piece which became the tree that you see in the gallery here, Maroonscape 3, Finding a Kampong. And it was always conceived as a gathering place. The tree itself had sort of multiple reference points. One of them is a tree in Jamaica in this community called Cockpit Country where Maroons lived. The tree was a space where people would gather and sign treaties and so on. So I wanted to bring the sort of the energy of that kind of rebellious spirit of the Maroons into the space. And then the form of the tree was based on lungs, and that was really based on our respiratory tract, and that was really in response to what was happening in the world in 2020, and particularly with the murder of George Floyd and the phrase "I can't breathe" being such a prevalent and important political point that the Black communities worldwide were making. But at the same time, I found that phrase was always a constant reminder of the kind of the abject state of Blackness. It was this thing that would kind of take my breath away when I would hear it, and I wanted to create this sort of monument to Black breath that was Black breath and community that would stand in the gallery and be a space for people to assemble around. And so that's where that started, and it was always envisioned this space of community. And then the process became like, okay, how do I bring community into this? How do I involve people? And the performance that you're seeing here on Black Breath Spectacle really set this whole process for what's in the show here going. And I invited you and many others to into the gallery to carry a recording of senior members of the Black community, the breathing of senior members of the Black community around the gallery, and then assembling in this room. And it was about just making this really kind of very subtle intervention into the gallery space, into this space of the Vancouver Art Gallery, which is a former courthouse, and bringing our breath into there, and then sort of using that as a way of forming community. So that's where the project began.
Right, and then from there you went on to develop spectrographs as a way of Gosh, this slideshow is really just obeying us. This isn't like intentional, but you did the spectrograph showing the rhythm of the Black breath, and now in this new exhibition, well, it's interesting because when I saw that spectrograph work from before showing the rhythm of the breath, it really reminded me of the work that you do that kind of tessellates. There's often this kind of motif of this sort of infinity almost of your work, these sort of fractal forms. I think of your actor boy painting. I think of those geometric spheres that you did. But with this, in the show Ocean to Livity, you've really taken just snippets of the spectrograph down to hundredths of a second to kind of create what you described as portraits. And as someone who just curated a show entirely of Black portraiture, I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit more about this idea of the portrait.
Yeah, so, I'll admit, actually, the desire to kind of put the spectrographs in the show was something that really came up after I was in Jamaica over Christmas, and I came back and was just struck by the poverty of color in our environment. I remember leaving when we were leaving Canada, and we get through Toronto, and you're like, oh, there's so many people of color around. And when I came back from Jamaica, I'm like, oh my God, everything is gray. Like, everything is gray. And so there was there was just this desire for color, which was part of the motivation of using the spectrographs. But as I was working with them, I guess I started to try to find the point where they were more individuated. So in the larger spectrogram, they're kind of to suggest this sort of infinity and continuity of breath that goes on and on and on and on and on. So but in the I was kind of trying to think of like this, just the preciousness of each moment of breath. Like every second is like breath is such an immediate demand, and it has to happen all the time. Your body is always consuming the oxygen. You always need to take that next breath, and so every moment of it is precious. And I was trying to kind of capture that sense, and also how individual each one was, because when you tune into a certain scale, then it stops being just general waves, and you start to see how the different frequencies that are present in everybody's breath, and it becomes quite individual.
Right. That's fascinating. And, it's interesting, too, just thinking about time in your work as well, because, of course, there's this sort of rhythmic motif that goes through breathing. You've kind of individuated that with this spectrograph, but at the same time, kind of looping sounds, and even that closed loop of the lichen.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting just to think about how your work sits in time, because there's this beautiful. I actually wrote it out on my phone. I'm not texting, I'm just reading. I promise. It was in Jessie Cox and Isaac Jean-François' Aesthetics of Black Breathing, writing alongside a chorus of silenced voices nevertheless sounded in an alternate universe. That was such a beautiful passage that reminded me of, when we worked together on my exhibition at the Polygon a couple years ago, and you told me about how you sort of imagined Actor Boy being kind of this divergent future, of this sort of splintering off in this kind of parallel timeline. So I was just interested to hear you speak a little bit about your relationship to time, to history, and to futurity in a work like this.
Yeah, I guess there's this sense that the present moment is always holding these multiple time frames of both in terms of like where we can go in terms of possibility, but also our expectation of what the future looks like, how our understanding of the past, and those are always sort of it's always this multiple. It's never, even though we think the present moment is just one thing, it's actually, it's really just the crossroads. It's where all those things meet at one particular time. And with the figure of Actor Boy, I guess I'm trying to, he diverges from a different point in that crossroads. So, and there is always this sort of attempt to not surrender to what we think the present is, because it is a construction of these sort of multiple things. So if you pull apart those threads, then there's a different path than necessarily than the one that we think that we're on. Because if we follow what the kind of how when all the threads are gathered together, we think we know what the trajectory is, but when we look at each individual thread, there's always this sort of huge realm of possibility in terms of where we could go and what the present could be. Right. So I guess I try to kind of imagine work that is not necessarily on the main thread, but it exists. It exists in the present, but it's kind of maybe at odds to the kind of the main trajectory of it. Is that? That's kind of going on in my head.
No, that's great. That's how these conversations should be. We haven't scripted any of this, as you can probably tell. But I'm interested too, just in this idea of talking about, again, going back to the breath and going back to thinking about breath as this thing that's kind of like embodied ancestry, and that quite literally our ancestors sort of breathe through us and speak through us because we carry them in our blood and in our breath. And it's interesting because, you have concepts like, in ancient Greek philosophy, you have pneuma. In Chinese tradition, you've got ki. You have prana. In Hinduism, you've got these words that very kind of literally refer to breath and tie it to a kind of vitalistic life force or something collective and transpersonal. You've connected it to Livity, and I'm interested to hear you speak a little bit about at what point you kind of formed that connection in bringing it into a specifically Black context.
again, this was when I returned from Jamaica, when it sort of, that phrase clicked to this, and it was, in the term livity is another term for life first, and it's also your way of life. So your livity affects your livity. The way you live affects your life force.
Right.
In Jamaican parlance, and it seemed like a way to capture. I was trying to capture both things, like our experiential reality that is brought through the way we like show up in the world and the way we live in the world, and then also this sort of more what is more at our essence, that life force. I'm trying to hold those two things and then very much connect them to this sense of ancestry, which, as you say, is literally in our DNA. It's like literally, we are what has come before us, and both. And there's also, I guess, a concern for epigenetics, like the sort of genetic memory that we could have, which is another way of just saying, we carry the memory of our ancestors in us and with us. So it's trying to pull all of those things together.
I think it does it really well, and I'm interested too, just in that going back to, there's so many kind of threads here to sort of tease apart, but when we were sort of chatting before, one thing that kind of came up was how you've been asked about, there's been an interest in the materiality of your work, but I was really struck when I went through Ocean to Livity of the immateriality of it, and these things like Morse code and this kind of orchestration of Black breath into this kind of symphony, and even just making space for air in an exhibition space, that there's just like the tree, and it's sort of this grove, this kind of gathering space. So I was interested to hear you kind of speak about, not being object-oriented for an exhibition like this.
Yeah, so this exhibition has kind of deviated particularly in that way, and it started out with the concern for much more objects within that space that would have had a more material presence, even though, as I say, I don't consider my work materially based. Like they're almost, I see them almost as images in like multiple dimensions. But this work, it sort of really began to insist upon itself that it kind of clear the room in a way, and I see and make space for itself. And it was a demand that the work put on me and like in the process of making it more than intention, I would say, in how it turned out. That said, it feels like it kind of achieved the right thing with that. Like the tree for me sits almost in defense of the space. It sort of defends the grove like that. And I'll refer again to the sort of tree in a kampong, which is on what they call a seal ground, which is a sacred space in the community, a space that is, for sacred action and for the ancestors to emerge and so on. So the tree is sort of there is a sort of this spiritual function to the tree and to how the space functions, and it really demanded that I just sort of open up the space and make space for, make space for light and sound in that environment.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. I mean, given that this is an opening reception, there's going to be tons of people in there. Like, try to come back when it's very quiet, because I was in there earlier. And the space of that tree kind of protects. And just the sound that you hear, I know that it's layered with Morse code and, these various effects. But what you really just pick up on is this very rhythmic, very peaceful breathing. And it's almost like having a loved one sleeping nearby. Like, it's so beautiful and it's so calming, and it really actually gets into your body. And then combined with that is, of course, that sort of guided breathing exercise that we went through, who sort of contributed to the Black Breath Archive, which is such a crazy experience. Like, it was really quite powerful what we went through with that, and it's wonderful that you've brought that through for people to listen to and experience. And I guess I'm curious to hear you sort of, I think we've spoken about this before, but maybe just to reiterate how you sort of developed that sequence of questions and that sort of visualization, and sort of maybe what you hoped to achieve or what you expected to, and maybe as you observed members of the community going through this process, what surprised you about it?
Yeah. So the first iteration of that script was I did when I was recording. There were half a dozen sort of senior members of the Black community that recorded for the Black Breast Spectacle performance, and I was like, okay, I want to bring breath into the room, and then like, okay, how do I want to bring it into the room, and what do I want to bring into the room? And I'm like, actually, I want to bring this sort of longitudinal sense of Black history into the room. I want to bring not only ourselves, but I want to bring the people who have brought us to this space. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have people think about their ancestry while they're doing this breathing, while I'm recording this breathing, and so that's sort of simply how it started. And I wasn't really thinking about what I would get from that specifically. But what happened was, like, the room was like, it was just really intimate. You got this very immediate intimate connection with people that it wasn't a verbal communication. It was just this communication through listening and through breathing. And in this invitation to bring their ancestors into their breath. And I was just struck by the intimacy of it, and also the variety of it, how much people's breath changed, and even over the course of the prompts that I would give them, I would get different sort of things. And then at the end of it, I would also sometimes get these stories of, like, okay, this is who I was thinking about, and this is what happened. And so I really tried to focus in on that, like, okay, well, how do we really capture that experience now that I see how it could work? And so the script that you'll hear out there, or that series of prompts, was kind of crafted to really be much more intentionally sort of bring so that experience of your ancestor into kind of your mental frame, and into your corporeal body, into your breath, and then also that kind of this envisioning of yourself as your ancestor, as into your body as well. And then what happened was that sort of amplified, I guess, reactions that we got, and there was just really a huge variety. And, like, some people's breath is, like, almost silent. It's like you could barely hear, very, like, just so quiet and so subtle. And then other people laughed, other people cried in the room. People had, people were uncomfortable with the image of the ancestors that they brought up. There were people who, brought up figures that they had unresolved tensions with. Wow. So a lot of stuff came up, in the course of that, and then the kind of tried to craft that into sort of an experience in the room.
Well, it was an incredible experience, and I encourage everybody to try this if you get a chance. I'm going to ask you one more question. I think we'll go to questions from the audience, and it was just, talking about the tree, but then going to the form of the lichen. And, we were talking earlier about these sorts of fractal forms, and that's sort of one instance where that kind of shows up. And thinking about lichens as, when there's, like, volcanic rock and there's no life, lichens are the first organism to inhabit it. They're the ones who draw in the air and put it in the rock and start to turn it into soil that then plants and trees can grow out of. And because of that, lichens are sort of like not only natural air purifiers, but also very sensitive, because if they're drawing in toxic things, they die, and you can kind of tell how breathable air is by the presence of lichen. I was kind of interested to think about, in thinking about the tree, at what point you brought in lichen as kind of like the accompanying thing with that, and how you sort of see it as relating to this kind of this sort of foundational or sort of building block element in relation to that.
Yeah, I mean, the lichen really emerges as something that I just would continually observe I do quite a lot of forest walks, and this was just this really beautiful form that is just present everywhere once you start looking at it. And it's like a coral. It's like almost like coral. Like they're really and they have this magnificent variety in them. And then they're also a symbiotic organism. They're not a single organism. Right. They're bacteria. They're a fungus, and they're a algae or cyanobacteria. So it's sort of they are a community,
right? Nice.
In and of themselves,
yeah.
And then they have all of these tremendous ecological roles in regeneration and stuff. And I think I did start to think of that as sort of think about it in terms of communities, like the Black community or whatever community within, how it inhabits a space, how it changes with its particular composition and formulation. So a lichen, if it's it might be the same fungus, but it's a different algae, and it'll take on a completely different form. And so it just became this sort of wonderful, rich metaphor to play with, and then something that works so well with, like, the symbol of the forest is of course a tree, but there's all of this other life that is integral to that composition. So the lichen kind of just became this. Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with lichen. This thing that it seemed to sort of tell such a big story and it's such this sort of tiny overlooked thing. And then in breath cycle, for example, it's like I'm trying to get at sort of lichen as this sort of regenerative and also this sort of ancient form, and sort of take breath back to, instead of just, we think of like, oh yeah, the trees are always kicking out oxygen for us, but actually the oxygen we breathe is like assembled over millennia. Like we don't, like pretty much all the oxygen that's produced now will be absorbed next year, but over millennia and millennia and millennia, there's an incremental increase in the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, and that's what we actually breathe. So I'm trying to think of like these sort of depths of time as well as sort of these moments of time, which would be in the breath portrait. So like trying to think of like multiple scales of time.
Yeah, and how that relates to our. Both our social and our ecological moment in time, for sure. And there's so much more we could say, but I feel like we should take some questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Zamali. I haven't seen the show yet, but I'm super excited to. My question, I feel like it's a bit long-winded, so I'll try and get it through quickly. My question is, what do you want people to feel when they first enter the room, and how do you think your art makes that happen? And why I ask this is because I feel like imagery makes a statement, especially big imagery. You have like churches beforehand, which were like, we're the biggest thing in the city, and people are like, the church is the biggest thing. And now you have like tower blocks and corporations in London, like empty buildings is what you see, and that's what you take when you enter a room. Whereas your work seems to be saying a very different message, but it is also very big. Like when you go in, you see that tree. So when people see that, when they enter the room, what do you want people to feel? And how does your art do that? Thank you.
I think there's on one level, I want people to let their guard down. like, I feel that we exist on a emotional register that's often like, we don't drop down and connect with our somatic selves and our presence, like our corporal presence in a space, and I want people to feel that. Ultimately, I think especially in the course of the space, and so as I say, that so the tree is a spectacle. It does have like this moment of awe to the tree, I think. But when you walk, but the tree doesn't make itself actually the center of the room. The tree, as I say, protects the room, and the tree protects the space for you to actually step into your kind of corporal self, into I'd say that. So that's maybe where I want to go with that.
Hi, Charles. This was a really interesting discussion. My name is Handel Wright. I'm a professor at UBC. I'm also an immigrant from Sierra Leone, and I'm a Creole. And I don't know if that resonates with you at all, because I don't know if this is a question or this is an invitation. The Creole people, I literally grew up a few hundred meters from the cotton tree and a few hundred meters from the Maroon Church. So my people are the descendants of the folks that came from Nova Scotia, went back to Sierra Leone, including the Maroons and the poor black from Britain. And in Freetown, what is the center of Freetown is a tree. The first people who came to what is now Sierra Leone, to Freetown from elsewhere, that was where they first took shelter. So that tree has immense meaning, and I grew up in that neighborhood. And I guess this is an invitation. When I saw that tree that you did, it gave me chills, because it brought me back to our tree. And those Maroons who had a very complicated history, from being rebellious, etc., in Jamaica, to collaborating with the British in putting down rebellion in Sierra Leone. And when you talk about an alternative history and bringing in the ancestors, your libation from the beginning just brought me back to our own procedures and ways of doing things. And as you bring people into your work, I just want this to be an invitation to you to consider that other tree beside the tree in Jamaica, that other set of Maroons beside the Maroons that you know, that other way of all of us ending up in this space called Canada, and how we trace our ancestry, including those of us from the continent who trace our ancestry back to Canada.
Thank you. And yeah, I have a specific relationship to some specific trees. I know, and the cottonwood tree is, it is recognized as the tree that is filled with ghosts or filled with spirit in Jamaica. So there is those references that continue. I'm so happy that you had that response to the space. One thing that I wanted to talk to Elliot about, which we didn't get to, was the notion of how you can create a space that feels black. And I was thinking about your exhibition in that context of black, black portraiture, and that. Like, can we create a space for the black body where the black body doesn't have to be in that space to defend it, So I was thinking about this sort of space that welcomes us into that space that maintains a space for us, which is something that we don't actually really often have in Canada in particular. Like there's a specific dynamic in Canada where that space is always being closed down. If it's not actively defended, if it's Hogan's Alley, it's Africville, it's whatever space that is identified as a black space is somehow under threat, and may be maintained when people are there active to maintain it. But can we have a space that maintains itself, that we can enter into comfortably, that can feel like that space is for us, without our bodies having to be there to defend it. So anyway, that's a sort of side thought, but I really appreciate the sentiment, and also the invitation to consider these other histories. I am very aware of the very complicated Maroon histories through Canada, through Sierra Leone, and also even in Jamaica as well, where they were periods of collaboration with the British. So thank you.
Hi, this is Divya. Thank you for having us here and having this discussion. I've seen in your art, wherever you go, you have a bell along with you, right? So I just want to know the significance. How does it attach with your culture, with your art? Because this has a lot of significance in my culture.
You know what, I'm going to ask you, tell me what's the significance of my bell. I will say, part of what I'm doing often is making things up. I mean, not that I don't do my research, but the histories that we live we've been denied actually a continuity of historical knowledge within the context of the Black community, and so I end up doing things that I feel are right, and it might actually be a borrowed thing. I might actually inadvertently be saying, oh, I don't know, I'm hearing this bell. I'm using it as a signal that calls spirit. It's part of that calling the spirits of memory, or spirits of the ancestors, or process in the performances I do. But it's part of the language that I've developed, and I don't have a direct line that this is what this means in Jamaican culture. This is what it has come to mean for me. And also saying that Jamaican culture is not a single thing either. There's multiple African nations that were there. There's a very large Indian community. There's very large Chinese community, as well as a white community that have all creolized in that space. So what I might think is the references is I actually might have another reference that might be more directly related to your culture, to a deeper cultural knowledge that you have than I have.
I don't even know if I've managed to word the question that I have completely yet, but we were lucky enough to get here a little bit early. We walked through the exhibition, and what a singular experience. There is this quote by Salman Rushdie that came on coming into my mind, that a sigh isn't just a sigh. We inhale the world and breathe out meaning while we can. And I sort of started thinking about how all those millennia of meaning that have been breathed out ultimately can only be expressed through something as abstract and elemental as a breath. Anything else would pin it down too narrowly. But that's not the question I wanted to ask. My question is, there is this sense of comfort and being at one with everything and everyone, having this elemental thing in common with everyone and everything that you initially experience. We all have that breath in common. But then you also have a line that says it's at odds with the unknowable specificity of Black experiences. And that's what comes through next. That's the next layer. Each of those, what do you call those images of visualized breath?
The spectrograph.
The spectrograph. So each of them is like a singular fingerprint. And then the second layer is this, you get comfortable with knowing, this common knowing, and then you feel a little bit like an imposter, that there is something that you shouldn't feel comfortable with. There's something you shouldn't know. You should not generalize that experience. And I'm wondering, that sort of slight feeling of imposterness, that's the aftertaste, is that meant to be a part of it?
I mean, that is kind of where I'm trying to place people, is that because we do so race is a social construction. There is no essential Blackness. Genetically, the color of my skin doesn't mean any more than the color of somebody's eyes. but you know, scientifically, but there's a sort of experiential you know, experience of the world that I'm going to have that you're not going to have. So I kind of want both you know, the lie to reveal itself in a way, like but we can't get away the fact that we are directed by that fiction, by the fiction of that division, and I don't want to pretend that it's not there, because I don't want to say, oh, we are, you know, yeah, oh yes, we are all one. Like that would be lovely, but that's not the world we're actually in. So I really want you to be in proximity and to feel both of those things at the same time, or at least, you know, moment to moment and against each other.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you.